those what would you tell your younger self, but like the one that has really changed the way I train is, to focus back on the fundamentals, which has sort of reined me back in. So my second thing is just to focus on the fundamentals, and that's something that I've gotten back to in my training because I had gotten playing the fancy open guards, which I still think are really fun and interesting and always engaging. But I'm 43 years old. I'm not going to be able to spin on my head forever. Well, hopefully I will, but in any event, I don't. Like, I might not be berimboloing at 70, but I want to be doing jiu-jitsu when I'm 70.
Yeah.
And that sort of relates to my third big lesson, which is take nutrition and body care much more seriously, much sooner. Like, a common theme among all these old school guys that I talk to, because I love to interview the people like Richard Bressler, right, that have been doing jiu-jitsu for 35 years. And all these people say, hey, I wish that I'd been doing yoga sooner. I wish that Murilo Bustamante, huge believer in yoga, and talking to him was really inspiring. And taking nutrition seriously.
What's up, everyone? My name is Paul Tokuzolu, and this is the Mat-Tricks BJJ Podcast. We have been putting out a lot of content lately on our YouTube channel. So if you haven't seen that yet, go to YouTube and check out the Mat-Tricks YouTube channel. Smash that subscribe button and you'll get regular updates whenever we post our content. We've been doing lots of narrated rolls lately and also posting new technique videos and videos of tournament footage and all sorts of stuff. So please go check that out. I think you're really going to like it. Thanks to Yoga for BJJ for sponsoring this podcast. If you haven't yet, go to yogaforbjj.net and sign up for their free 2-week trial. You'll get total access to their website for 2 weeks. That's enough time for you to do 2 of their different programs. Yoga for BJJ has totally changed my life, not just my jiu-jitsu, but they've introduced me to yoga, which is something that I'm really passionate about now, and it helps your jiu-jitsu more than you can imagine. If you've never done yoga before, it's really going to help your jiu-jitsu, and it's going to help with stress, health, flexibility, everything. Yoga is a really powerful tool for bettering your life and for bettering your jiu-jitsu. So go check out yogaforbjj.net, sign up for their 2-week trial, and let me know what you think. My guest on the podcast today is Jeff Shaw. Jeff is the host of the Dirty White Belt Radio. Jeff's podcast serves to illuminate jiu-jitsu in the south of the United States, especially the area around North and South Carolina. I really enjoy Jeff's approach to podcasting, where he has kind of a niche area where he kind of covers everything going on in that area, for the jiu-jitsu scene. So in this episode, we talk a lot about how Jeff got started, why he chose to structure his podcast the way that he does, and lessons that we've all learned from podcasting. I always love talking to other podcast hosts because I've found that a lot of the same things that they've learned from their guests, I've learned from mine, even though it's totally different guests. Please welcome my friend Jeff Shaw. Thank you so much for doing the show today, man. It's great to have you on.
Oh, it's awesome to be here. Thanks a lot for having me on the show.
So what got you started doing a podcast? I know, one of the things I really like about your show is that you're kind of area centric. Like, you specifically cater to jiu-jitsu in the Carolinas. Can you talk about how did you start with that idea?
First of all, thanks a lot for the kind words. I really appreciate it. I got the idea to do a podcast when I was a white belt, but I told myself I wouldn't start a podcast or a blog until I got my blue belt, because I'd quickly fallen in love with jiu-jitsu and it dominated my thoughts and my time, but I wanted to make sure it was sort of a sustainable love. And so once I had the blue belt and I realized, okay, I was in this for the long haul. All right, let's try and do this. And it's the podcast itself is a bit of a funny story. I have some friends that I went to school with who started a radio station, a low power FM radio station in Hillsborough, North Carolina, and they were looking for content programming. And sort of on a lark, I had always had the idea of doing a podcast, but there's a certain level of technical knowledge, of equipment, of just sort of know-how that I didn't have. And so this radio station said, well, we have a capture card, so you can do your show live. We will capture the show, and it'll upload automatically to the internet, so you won't have to do anything.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, no, this sounded great to me.
That's awesome.
And so, yeah, so like, because it's a community, and so there's two reasons that we focus on North Carolina and beyond. You know, we've extended out up around the American East Coast as we get to know more people and interview more people. But like, first of all, I come from a community journalism background, and so I really think I think almost everybody in jiu-jitsu has an interesting story if you just give them the time to tell it. And so there's so many fascinating people that I got to train with or learn from. There's a lot of awesome black belts in this area because this is one of the first places that Hoist Gracie came to in America. Gustavo Machado has a great school here. There's, you know, Lucas Lepri's in Charlotte now. And so there were so many interesting stories among the old school black belts, among some of the new school modern competitors, that it just made sense to me to interview people in person from this area. Now, since we've grown and started expanding, simply because as more people move here, as more people get promoted, as we learn more about the interesting stuff happening, then we just have ever more content. And plus, you know, if you want to listen to a jiu-jitsu podcast or read a jiu-jitsu blog, there's tons of nationally focused blogs about like the most badass black belts out there. Like, you know, you're never gonna have to be like, where can I hear about Uchecha? Where can I hear about Rodolfo Vieira? Where can I hear about Dominica? You know, those folks, everybody wants to talk to those folks. And so I felt like a community-centered podcast was the way to go for me.
Yeah, man, I totally agree. Like, one of the podcasts that got me started on podcasts or interested in podcasts is one called Barbell Shrugs, which is about CrossFit. And the thing I loved about them is, of course, they've had on like some of the best names in CrossFit on their show and powerlifting and weightlifting. But a lot of their early episodes, they were like, hey, this is our friend who owns a gym. Let's hear what his story's about, you know? And
yeah, totally. I mean, that makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah.
Because like everybody's got a great story, right? Like, and we've had a lot of people that you would call big names on the show just by virtue of meeting them at a seminar, meeting them at a super fight card, something like that. And those people are fascinating too, right? Like, and everybody wants to talk to those folks, but it's just as interesting to like, and I'm glad for that story because it's just as interesting to learn, all right, here's my experience running a gym. Here's my experience trying to like balance my yoga practice with jiu-jitsu. We you know, just the everyday stories of people that train, I think, are interesting enough.
Yeah, man. And the thing is, okay, so I love talking to really high-class athletes. Like, of course, it's always great. You know, it's incredible to hear their story and to hear people at that really high level. But it's not as relatable, someone who's like, oh, I train full time, 4 times a day, blah, blah,
I got these sponsors that pay for my stuff.
Yeah.
I sleep on the mats.
No offense. Like all my friends listening who are pro athletes, no offense. I love you guys. You're fucking awesome. But, it's so interesting to hear, like I started when I was working full time. I have a family. Now I'm a black belt and I own my own gym. Here's how I got started on my entrepreneurial journey. And for me, that's just as inspiring.
Yeah, me too. And one of the things that's interesting is sometimes really high level practitioners, I found it's about 50-50. Sometimes the really elite guys are super fascinating and thoughtful and are able to break down their journey and techniques in a way that's very understandable and very designed to impart information clearly. And sometimes they're just guys that are like, oh, I train hard, I show up, I do the armbar. And it's like, okay, man, I would do that if I could. And believe me, all the pro athlete pals that are listening to this, if I could train 4 times a day, if I was a young athletic stallion, I would absolutely do it. And so God bless you for living that life. I would have done it if I could. But in certain ways, I started when I was 36. Started jiu-jitsu when I was 36. Wow, man, and I'm 43 this year. And I think in a lot of ways that was a blessing for me because I've never been an especially athletic person, but but I know myself and I was pretty competitive when I was younger. My competitive pursuits took different form than athletics, but I could see myself if I was 22 when I started or 19, I could totally see myself be just utterly immersing myself in jiu-jitsu, and which would be a cool journey in another way. But I'm really grateful for the fact that now I think I have a bit more perspective and a bit more of a handle on my old competitive drive. I'm still competitive and I still love to go do tournaments and compete, but I feel like my place in the universe is a lot more as a sort of media, the person that's telling the stories of the people training 4 times a day, as opposed to the one doing it myself.
Yeah, that's I feel like it can be just as rewarding. I've had so many great experiences doing this podcast, and hope to have many more. And I'm sure you have had the same experience.
Definitely. Who's your favorite guest? Or you can give me top 3.
Top 3.
Because it's weird to rank one above all the others, but I like the idea of shouting out like the 3 group of most interesting.
Let's see. Each one of them is so interesting in their own way. I feel like each podcast episode I love podcasts because they're kind of standalone, and each podcast is like its own little movie or something like that, or its own little story, and there's always like a up and down, ebb and flow of the conversation. But to answer your question, my favorite episodes of my podcast are always the ones that aren't very popual.
Yeah. Oh, dude, I have exactly the same experience.
Yeah, for sure. Like my friend Ruin McFadden. The episodes with Ruin were really cool because Ruin's a world traveler who is also a purple belt in jiu-jitsu. And he came on the podcast and he was talking about like going to Kazakhstan and training jiu-jitsu there and hiking mountains. And he went to Svalbard, which is in the Arctic Ocean. It's like a gigantic island kind of off the coast of Norway. So those episodes are definitely some of my favorite. But like some of the, not as popular as the other ones. Not as popular as the ones with more big names, which makes sense, obviously, because the big names are, a lot of the times that's what people are going to listen to.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Continue. Sorry.
Yeah. No. And I love the episodes with my friend Charlie Finch. He has a lot of great stories. He's a brown belt under Phil Miglarice, who owns a school, Balance Studios, in New Jersey. And he has a fantastic story, really great perspective. But yeah, man. So it's always the ones that people don't know about. It's always these, people who aren't a world championship athlete or something like that. What about you? Is it a similar type of situation?
Very similar. And there's one episode that I think has the sweet spot, but I'll get to that in a second. So the 3 favorite, so our experience is remarkably similar, both in terms of the podcast, and I design gear and t-shirts for Toro BJJ sometimes.
Oh, cool.
And the ones that I think are like awesome, the ones that I'm like, oh, I'm so proud of this, are the ones that like 25 people like, but those 25 people really, really like it.
Yep. And
the stuff that I'm like, this is just okay. It's sort of a one-off funny joke, like go wildly viral. And I'm just like, what? But, it's just everybody has a different experience, and it's important to be reminded of that. And my favorite episodes, like yours, are not the most popular episodes of the show. Because a lot of times these are fascinating stories being told by average folks or folks that were in extraordinary situations. And I'm a big history guy. And so, like jiu-jitsu history. And so my 3 favorite episodes, and then a bonus one that kind of hits the sweet spot, are Mark Vaquerizo, who is one of the first American black belts. He was Joe Moreira's first American black belt. He was the 5th American to ever get a black belt in jiu-jitsu. He lives in North Carolina. So I was able to interview him, and just fascinating stories about like training before the UFC started, training, like nearly getting in fights with Chemo and Tank Abbott, and just all these like incredibly old school stories that I'm fascinated by, and like a dude whose story really hadn't been told. And so that's one of my favorite episodes. Again, not one of the most listened to shows. Another one is Lecca Vieira, who is a national figure and should be a lot more famous than she is, but she was the first woman to win the black belt worlds. And so this is somebody that started training when she was 15 or 16 in Brazil, walked in a room with like 50 buff Vale Tudo fighters, and that was her training experience. This tiny woman who's like, I'm going to stay here and I'm going to become a world-class badass in an environment that was probably not the most hospitable. And so she was one of the, and she is as responsible as anyone for the growth of jiu-jitsu in America, came over here and trained with Higan Machado. So it was just really, and she's just a lovely person. So it was really, that was one of my favorite episodes ever, a really special episode. Again, and again, is sort of like not as many people listen to it as I would like. And I guess my analog to some of your studies, or some of your stories, is there's a guy, Dewan Owens, that trains out here that has been on the podcast 3 times. And Dewan is one of the most fascinating people I know. He's only a jiu-jitsu blue belt, but he's a high-level MMA fighter who has fought in XFC, has been very close to the UFC on several occasions, has great jiu-jitsu, but his passion is striking. Mm-hmm. But he's also a dude who has just lived about 5 lives so far, even though he's still young and in his athletic prime. So he was a chess prodigy, got a chess scholarship to college, joined the Marines instead of pursuing that scholarship for a variety of reasons that we talked about, was a competitive breakdancer, and actually knew, but didn't know he knew. Like when he was breakdancing, he was B-Boy Supreme, and he knew these dudes who were also competitive breakdancers that he sort of lost touch with. And then years later, somebody's like, hey, we're bringing out some of these 10th Planet dudes to do a seminar. This guy, the Boogeyman, and this guy. He's like, hey, I used to know a guy named Boogie who breakdanced. Yeah. It's the same guy.
Yeah.
So we'd known each other. And like they'd lost touch for 4 years, and it's like their paths converged.
That's so cool.
And it just, yeah, and it was just this fascinating thing that, so Dewan is one of the more interesting cats I know, and, an artist of all stripes. So, but, not enough people know about him. So those are some of my favorites. The one famous, I guess, quote unquote famous jiu-jitsu person that I think hits the sweet spot of fascinating, down-to-earth human stories, but also a dude that you would have heard of, is the episode with Pedro Sauer that we just did. Because, it's sort of dangerous to meet the people that you really admire, because sometimes they live up to it, and a lot of times they don't. And Pedro Sauer is everything you would want him to be. He is cordial and friendly and intelligent and articulate and open-minded and is interested in what you have to say, and he's not going to, and he's going to openly consider other perspectives and points of view. He's going to tell you amazing stories about training with Elio and Hickson and, all these dudes about, about living in Hickson's garage with Limao and just all this incredible stuff, but is also going to have that. By the way, I'm also a 9th degree red and black belt. So.
Yeah, Pedro is the one who gave me my blue belts.
No way! That's dude, I couldn't admire him more, dude.
He's awesome.
He's so good.
It's awesome. And I started my jiu-jitsu journey at one of his affiliates in Maryland.
Oh, that's super badass. I'm going up. Work sends me to DC from time to time. One of my good friends, David Porter, is a black belt there, and so I usually take the drive in rush hour traffic to go and train at the Pedro headquarters. It's worth it. Beta Academy, I also train out there. Those guys are awesome. But that's really cool that you started your journey with a Pedro school. That's legit as it comes.
This is a testimony to how nice he is. But I totally failed the exam by any stretch. I guarantee. I mean, he probably wouldn't say that, but. He came over, while I was doing the whole test, he came over, I fucked up so much stuff, and he was like, actually, this is how I like to see this. Here, do it a couple more times. But he's just so nice, and I was like, fuck, man, I definitely didn't get my blue belt, but he was like, he gave it to me anyway. So I was like, oh, that's a nice guy. Thanks, Pedro Sauer. I appreciate that.
Yeah, no, that's the thing. I think Pedro, there are a lot of instructors that I don't feel like are invested in the development of their students as people, and it's just like, okay, you're going to show up and, you pay the rent and the bills here, and it's what you can do for me. But Pedro, you get the vibe that he cares about you as an individual and is interested in your growth and development. And so maybe he was like, this kid needs his blue belt. Here you go, buddy. And
this kid seems like he has some issues. He could probably use a blue belt to cheer him up.
Yeah. And he's such a humble guy, too. Like, when Rylan Lazares, who's a 2nd degree black belt under Pedro, was out there, and Pedro gave this, really wonderful self-effacing speech where he's like, because I was like, okay, cool, I get to take a class from Pedro Sauer. And he's like, you guys see me all the time. You're probably sick of me teaching. So Rylan's going to teach tonight. And I was like, I don't think anybody's sick of you teaching, dude. But Rylan is also a monster and taught a tremendous class.
Man, that's awesome. That's so cool. That's it's funny that we're talking about this because I had Drew Weatherhead on the podcast. He's the guy who does Because Jitsu, the memes. That's another one of my favorite episodes. Drew's fucking hilarious and very insightful dude. So, but he was saying, again, I was asking him, what's been your experience making the memes? And he was saying, the ones that he makes that have him, dying of laughter, he thinks is the funniest thing. And he's like, I can't wait to post this. This is going to be the hit. This is it. then he's like, oh, that one like totally flopped. No one cared. Gets like 40 likes on Facebook or whatever. And then the ones that he just kind of throws together and he's like, this is kind of corny, but I got to get it out there. That's the one that takes off. And he's like, like, what are you going to do?
I seriously could not identify more with that. Like Boomer from Toro BJJ, he's the guy that I do a lot of my designs with, some of which start as memes, some of which are just like, hey, it's ideas. And it's always the ones that I'm like, this is the dopest thing ever, that 25 people click like on. It's like, okay, sorry guys. But like the example of the opposite is, so you've probably heard the phrase, is every jiu-jitsu person has said the phrase, shrimp and ain't easy, right? So one day I'm like messing around on my computer and I see this picture of a shrimp. And I put a pimp hat on him, like a 70s, like, and I put in his little, I don't even know what you call it, but like a shrimp's hand. And I put a little pimp cane in his hand, and I just make the same generic impact font, meme font that we see that just says shrimp and ain't easy. And I put it on my Instagram, and I have a good chuckle, and I go on with my life. Never intended it for it to be a product of any nature. But 2 years later, Boomer is going through my Instagram. It's like, let's put this on a shirt. And like, it is probably the most popular thing I've ever done. And like, BJJ HQ bought it. It sold out in a couple hours. I was like, dang. I was like, and it's one of those things where like, I'm really glad people enjoyed it, but it's really, and Boomer's been in the t-shirt business for a long time. And he told me early on, he's like, you never can predict what is going to resonate with people.
Yeah.
The one thing that I did, the thing that I did design that I'm super stoked on, that people liked, that I thought is like, I'm a big Godzilla guy. And so one of the first things I made was a rash guard where I live in Durham, North Carolina, which has a sort of unique skyline that has old Southern American brick buildings and a water tower that has the Lucky Strike logo on it, because the Lucky Strike factory used to be here, because Durham was a tobacco town. And so I photoshopped Godzilla fighting Gamera over the Durham skyline.
Yeah.
I kind of thought that was going to be one of those where like 25 of my friends think this is awesome and no one else. But like I did, but people started sending me pictures of it all over the world, California, Europe, and like it got on BJJ HQ, which is an awesome distribution mechanism for cool jiu-jitsu stuff. That's so cool. Sold out really fast. And I keep wanting Boomer to make another run of those, but he likes the limited edition business. So, and I am far from a business guy, so I got to trust him.
Yeah. It's funny how these things work, isn't it? Like I've had many of those, man. I've had like, this is the podcast. This is the one. It's going to shake the world. People are going to hear this. They're going to be like, holy fuck. Like I had Richard Bressler on the podcast who,
I'd love to get him on.
Dude, he was awesome. He's the first, and see what I mean? Like people who know, who are in the know, they know. But he is the first guy to ever take a jiu-jitsu lesson in America. The first American to ever train jiu-jitsu. And he's been training 32 years. And fascinating episode. But, didn't take off.
I'm definitely going to go into your archive and check that one out. Because, like, see, and this is the kind of stuff that resonates with me, right? Like, like 32 years of jiu-jitsu, the first guy... So I'll tell you a story too about the episode that could never be.
Please.
And I'm still hopeful about this, but it's been like a year now. So I got a hold, like my fiance is a journalist, and so for a present for me, because she asked me a list of like, who's your dream episodes, and Bressler was on that list, Leka Vieira was on that list, and Craig Cucook was on that list, who was I think the third American black belt, like that maybe he was the first. Anyway, he made those early DVDs with Henzo.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and he doesn't have a school anymore, and so she tracked him down, and she found and like he called me one day, and we had this awesome conversation for like a half hour. He's like, "Yeah, I'd love to." Told me some amazing stories, super engaging, personable guy. Then I'm like, "All right, man, can I record this?" He's like, "Oh, I'll call you back tomorrow," and I still haven't heard from him. So but it was cool that he got to tell me the stories, which was nice.
How many times has this happened where like you start talking before the episode and you're like, oh man, I should have been recording like 20 minutes ago?
Oh yeah.
That
happens so often.
Are there any memorable things that were not on the episode, but were said.
Oh yeah, are you talking about Q-Cuck or like it was nothing explosive, but like he sort of told me like his side of why he left the Gracie Academy. I mean, there was nothing that was like gossipy, and nothing that I remember, but it was just cool to like get his perspectives on, because I trained under Hoyce, but his perspective of like Hoyce at the time and what the dynamic was. I will say that like the other episode that I had that there was something like that is Robert Drysdale. If you ever get a chance to interview Robert Drysdale, super interesting, super smart, very thoughtful, and a total history nerd. Has read everything there is about jiu-jitsu history, and he's plain spoken. Like he'll tell you what he actually thinks. And so like he actually threatened to fight Henry Gracie on my podcast, and I was like, wow, this might take off, but it didn't. I mean, and honestly, I don't really. I mean, I'm not in this to start. I hate drama, don't want to start any. But I was like, oh, and he just kind of offered it up, like during the course of giving his opinions about the certified training centers and stuff. And it was just like, well, but he had this so the part that I really wished I recorded in the Drysdale interview is we were getting breakfast before, and he's like, well, people don't know about Robert Drysdale, and I use this word utterly admiringly because I use it to describe myself and my friends. He's a huge nerd. Mm. Like the dude is like a book, video game, like geek in a lot of ways. Yeah. And yes, he's also one of the most badass jiu-jitsu and MMA fighters, but he's also a nerd. And so he's on his phone and he's playing like Clash of Clans. And I'm like, man, you play that? You like that game? He's like, yeah. You know who else plays this game all the time? It's the Meow Brothers. And we start talking about how we want to track down the Meow Brothers username on Clash of Clans so I can finally like maybe beat them at something. But they're probably amazing, right? Like I probably wouldn't have a chance even with that, because it's like basically jiu-jitsu and sit on your phone. But I wish that we had recorded that bit, because that would have been fun times.
So many jiu-jitsu people and like martial artists in general, MMA fighters, are huge nerds. So many of the ones that I've met, huge nerds. I think it's because I think Joe Rogan and Jocko Willink were just talking about this on Joe's podcast. It's like jiu-jitsu makes nerds into like assassin nerds, because like we're not good at any other sports for the most part. Yeah. But jiu-jitsu, if you have that like nerdy obsessionness that kind of goes along with the same drive that makes you addicted to like Roller Coaster Tycoon when you're a kid, is the same drive, that the same like type of thing that you need to do well at jiu-jitsu. Totally. Because what is jiu-jitsu? It's problem solving, and it's advanced problem solving in myriad positions where like my instructor is fond of saying there are more possible moves in a game of chess than there are atoms in the universe. And jiu-jitsu is more complicated than chess because you have physical dynamics that are X factors involved. Yep. 3D. So, right? Yeah. It's in a third dimension, jiu-jitsu. Yeah. Exactly. So it's like Vulcan chess, but with bodies. And with all those different X factors, right? This is why jiu-jitsu is always fascinating to me, and why I think it's fascinating to other nerds, is because any position, there's so many variations, you're never going to get bored, right? Like you and I could decide, you and me, we get together in a gym and just be like, all right, for the next year, Paul, we're just doing side control. Just this one subset of a position, which is a subset of an art, which is arguably a subset of fighting, depending on how you view jiu-jitsu. We'd easily just do a year on side control, and we wouldn't cover everything that you could do. And that's inspiring and killer. And like Pedro is amazing at this too, where Pedro Sauer, like I was really, because you'd be hard pressed to find someone that is more accomplished and experienced and at a high level. And like when you're around his gym, like he'll let his black belts or even his purple and blue belts, if they do a technique differently than he'll say, hey, show that to me. And he's still learning and is upfront about that. And that blows my mind, right? This dude that has forgotten more about jiu-jitsu than I'm ever likely to learn is still learning. And that's something that makes this art awesome. Yeah, man. It's infinite. Mm-hmm. For the most part. And whenever you think you finally got it a little figured out, then someone comes along and throws on some new techniques that you've never seen before, or you go to a new gym. That's the real mindfuck, is when you're like tapping everyone at your gym, or whatever, you're competitive at your gym, and then you move to a new city, or you go start training somewhere else, and it's a totally different style, and you get crushed. That's happened to me many times. And then you're like, oh, they got a different style of jiu-jitsu, gonna have to learn that. and square one, white belt.
Totally. And that's the thing, like matchups matter, right? Like there are dudes that I do well against who get crushed by people who crush me. And it's like, how does that work? Or like a long time, like, so not very many people in North Carolina do berimbolo or lapel guard or any of the, sort of quote unquote modern stuff. And I do, because I'm a flexible guy. It's just inversion just naturally made sense to me. And so relative to the folk that I train with on a regular basis, I'm like the berimbolo guy, right? Like that is my A-game stuff. That is the stuff that I go to for. And so I went on a training trip to the West Coast. My mom still lives on the West Coast. And like, so I'm like, okay, well, let's try this stuff against, and of course, out there, like I'm probably a C+ berimbolo guy, maybe a B- berimbolo guy, right? And so it's like, oh wow, this is my A-game stuff, and it's not working even against these like mid-level cats. But then I tried some of the old school stuff, because North Carolina is super old school, like Gracie stack pass, fundamental. And I tried some of that stuff, and a lot of that stuff had fallen out of favor out there. And I was like, man, my B and C game techniques are more successful than my A game techniques, even though I'm worse at them, just because these folks are not as accustomed to that as, oh, he's going for my belt, here's what I do. And so this is why it's important to be well-rounded too, right?
Yeah, for sure.
That's what inspires me about like rolling with black belts, is that like really good black belts that know it all. Like somebody like Pedro, who's like, he's not a berimbolo guy, but he's not going to be lost wherever you take him. He's going to know more than you wherever it goes.
So, just to kind of wrap things up a little bit, what are some things from doing your podcast? What are like a few of your biggest takeaways that have actually like influenced your game, your way of doing jiu-jitsu?
Cool. So 3 things. First of all, I've taken away that everybody in jiu-jitsu knows something that I don't know, even the white belts. I had Dev Camarillo on the podcast, and he talked about how he was watching the ways one of his white belts pulls guard. And he's like, wow, I should do that, or I should teach that. And it's like, even the best of the best, know that people that are quote unquote below them can teach them things. So the second thing, I always ask people that are at a high level, what would you tell yourself when you first got your blue belt? Like, what should you do differently? And I get a bunch of different answers, but the one common theme is to focus more on the fundamentals, because it's the kind of stuff that never deserts you. Like one of my friends in a black belt out here, Jake Whitfield, is a very flexible dude, and he's not inverting anymore, because as he gets older and his body changes, he's like, okay, I'm not going to be spinning under people. But like, he has such incredible fundamentals that Jake, even for really, really badass competitive black belts, is almost impossible to submit. And so a lot of those answers have influenced me. Those, what would you tell your younger self? But like the one that has really changed the way I train is, to focus back on the fundamentals, which has sort of reined me back in. So my second thing is just to focus on the fundamentals, and that's something that I've gotten back to in my training, because I had gotten playing the fancy open guards, which I still think are really fun and interesting and always engaging. But I'm 43 years old. I'm not going to be able to spin on my head forever. Well, hopefully I will, but in the event I don't, like I might not be berimboloing at 70, but I want to be doing jiu-jitsu when I'm 70.
Yeah.
And that sort of relates to my third big lesson, which is take nutrition and body care much more seriously, much sooner. Like a common theme among all these old school guys that I talk to, because I love to interview the people like Richard Bressler, right? They've been doing jiu-jitsu for 35 years. And all these people say, hey, I wish that I'd been doing yoga sooner. I wish that Murillo Bustamante, huge believer in yoga, and talking to him was really inspiring. And taking nutrition seriously, because we know more about nutrition now than we ever have. And so maybe in your 20s, you can get away with, doing the Leandro Low plan of drinking a 2-liter of Pepsi, or if the Gary Tonon cheeseburger diet. Like if I were like those dudes, I mean, maybe you can get away with it, but like, you can't get away with that forever. You can't get away with having a couple beers the night before hard training. And so if I were to tell, so those are the things that I've learned from my podcast that I've sort of tried to incorporate, because I really do believe for most of us, jiu-jitsu is the hardcores, right? We want to do jiu-jitsu for the rest of our lives. We don't want to ever have a day where, oh man, I can't train. And so focusing on the fundamentals and focusing on nutrition and taking care of your body is really important.
Dude, it's really fascinating to hear this, because I've had almost the same. Almost the same from my people. Like, focus on the fundamentals, Fundamentals will never let you down. Phil Mingler-Reese talked about that in my first interview with him, where he was saying, the fundamentals will never let you down. And he said, like, never call them the basics, always call them the fundamentals. Because he said people will, he said he'll be rolling with someone, like some other black belt, and he'll get them with like a Americana, and the guy will be like, man, I can't believe you got me with a basic technique. And he's like, it's not the basics, the fundamentals. So like, it's there's no such thing as basics.
Yeah, dude, terminology really matters too. Yeah. Like we have a fundamentals class and an advanced class, and when we called it the basics or beginner jiu-jitsu, like none of the advanced guys showed up. Yeah. And like none of the white belts were showing up for the quote unquote advanced class. Exactly. When in fact, each could learn a ton from either. It's like the armbar is a technique you learn early on. Do you ever stop learning about how to armbar someone? Because I haven't.
No. Sure not. And just when you think you have, that's when someone comes in and shows you some detail, and then everything changes. Like we just had Ethan Crellinston visit us, and he fucking blew our minds with his triangle knowledge. Like he totally changed how I'll forever do the triangle choke from now on. Everything you know about the triangle choke is wrong. Danaher guys have recreated it, and it's crazy stuff.
So this thrills me for many reasons, two of which are, so Ethan Crellinston is going to be in town here next week competing on the Toro Cup, which is our version of the Matrix Invitational.
Have him on the podcast. He's great. Tell him I said hey.
I'm interviewing him. I will do so, because I'm interviewing him in 6 days. That's really exciting.
Dude, sorry, he lived in this very house for 2 weeks.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah, man, he's great. Me and Ethan are bros.
That's so rad. Maybe I'll surprise him in the middle of the interview and be like, what's your favorite thing about Paul?
My cats. Tell him my cats say hi. Good. That's so fun.
I will do.
Dude, little sidetrack, but right after he stayed with us, no coincidence, I'm sure these two are very, very correlated, but that was like, he went on the next week and won the ADCC trials. So like 3 or 4 days after I saw him, and I'm sure the two are related, of course, but
cat karma.
Exactly.
Cat karma.
But everyone suddenly knew him because he broke that dude's arm from the Kimura. Yeah. I was like, dude, like my version of Ethan is the guy who like enjoys playing with my cats at 2 a.m. and chasing them around the house and stuff like that. And I was like, it's just crazy. It's just a crazy world we live in.
Your version of Ethan is not the Matt Savage who shatters a dude's arm and
goes viral. Anyway, sorry, total sidetrack. But so you were saying about the 3 things about that interested you.
Oh yeah, about Ethan.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. So we have. So at our version, we have the Toro Cup out here, which is our version of the Matrix Invitational, and Ethan Crellinston and Nikki Ryan are coming down, and they're going to compete on that.
Oh, awesome!
And then we're going to have them on the show the next day, and so I'm sure that we will learn a bunch from watching them compete, and learn a bunch from talking to them on the podcast. And it's fascinating to me too that. The triangle choke is a basic choke, right? It's been around, I guess it's not a basic choke. It's a fundamental choke. But to have, I sort of am a big tent believer in jiu-jitsu in that it is very rare that you will hear me say, that's incorrect.
Yeah.
Because there are situations in which things can be correct, and even if it's not the way that we would normally do them or that you would teach a white belt to do them. Like if a dude at Ethan's level or a dude at Keenan Cornelius's level, like Keenan does the mounted cross-collar choke, very differently than the fundamental way, but it's also undeniably effective. Yeah. And so it's extremely rare that you'll hear me just flat out say, well, that's wrong. Yeah. Because, and those things exist, right? But they're few and far between, because it's, I wrote a blog post once called learn the rules, break the rules, make up new rules. Because the thing that you would tell, if I were just starting jiu-jitsu today, I would tell myself, all right, dude, never put your hands on the mat. Always keep your head in the middle when you're in someone's guard. And that's a great fundamental rule. That's, by and large, that will serve you wrong. And as you get more advanced in jiu-jitsu, you understand, okay, well, no, there are some situations where that's correct. It's definitely not something you want to tell someone who is early in their journey, because they'll hear it and be like, okay, it's okay if I do this. Why did I just get armbarred, triangled, omoplotted 50 times?
Exactly.
but it's also I'm also somebody that doesn't think there's only one way to do something.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's what I think of when you talk about the Danaher guys, right? Because a lot of what they do is sort of fundamental leg lock stuff. And a lot of it is also just like, okay, people are doing that. They're doing that in a different way than it has been done before.
Yeah.
Or that we know of, right? Or knitting these things together in a different way. Yeah. So it's important to be able to learn from that.
Yeah. And exactly like you said, you got to know the rules really well, and then you break them. Because honestly, so many of these guys that I see doing really well, like Oliver Taza, Ethan Krellinston, some of these guys that I've gotten the fortune of like spending some time with, what they're doing is they know the fundamentals very, very well, and they do it a little different. Like, they know the classic way. Like, for example, Oliver was just here teaching. He taught a seminar. He showed some really advanced stuff from the outside ashigarami leg lock position. And he knows exactly how 99% of people are doing it. And his way is like a little bit different, but it's just different enough that you don't know what he's doing. It's like just different enough that there's a little competitive advantage, but it's still within the fundamentals of that position.
Yeah, this is an excellent point, because it's all about the audience and the setting.
Yeah.
Another example I can think of is Rafael Mendez, right? Like, people back when Rafa was doing the Berimbolo, sort of pioneering a lot of crazy 50-50 stuff, people were like, oh, that's so weird, that's so modern. But all of these guys have incredible fundamentals. Yeah. It's just that you're not gonna pull close guard and cross collar choke Cobrinha, right? You're not gonna do. And so if you watch a lot of Rafa's matches, like early in his career, he will do incredible basics, basic passing, far side arm bars that are like, that's sort of on everybody's blue belt curriculum, and he does it flawlessly.
Yeah.
But like you said, you have to look for that little edge against other dudes that know most of the stuff you know.
Yeah.
And this is honestly a lesson for a lot of competitive athletes. And to be real, one of the flaws in sport jiu-jitsu. I love sport jiu-jitsu. I love watching it, and I love competing. And there's good and bad in everything. And mostly, I think, on balance, I advise everybody to compete, because I think you learn a lot about yourself, because it's valuable to put yourself in a high-pressure setting away from the people that you normally roll with, who are your friends, who have your best interests at heart, who aren't going to do dick things to try to harm you. Whereas in competition, those things are not always true.
Yeah.
The thing about competition that worries me is that, like, people get overly specialized because the competition system privileges that. Like, let's say a dude is better than me, at every position in jiu-jitsu except leg lock positions. I can beat guys that are way better than me if I trap them in that position, or the triangle, right? Like, I did or whatever it is for you. There are positions like that for everywhere. Like, I could compete, I could be much more well-rounded than someone, and my jiu-jitsu could be at a level that, if you were to take it in aggregate, was like, okay, Jeff has quote unquote better technique than that person, because in aggregate I know more jiu-jitsu. But if he gets me into his game, and it's like, oh crap, I'm trapped in his spider guard. Yeah. Now I got an uphill climb, because that guy knows spider guard way better than I do. Yeah.
Yeah, man. I think that's a really great point, actually. And there's a book I read recently called The Zen Way to the Martial Arts, and it's written by this dude who wrote the book was not the last samurai to ever exist, but he was a student of the last samurai to ever exist, if that makes sense. So he wrote it in like the 60s when he was like 90 years old, and he was talking about it was basically just everything he learned from this guy he trained with, who was one of the last living actual samurai. And he said he doesn't like competition in martial arts, and he didn't like that martial arts were starting to go towards competition, because it taught you that martial arts was you against someone else. And he was saying that's not the case. He's saying martial arts should be you against yourself, and you should be trying to develop a wide variety of skills, including mental and physical characteristics, if that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. And like and it's always helpful to learn from folks that have that type of pedigree. I believe that competition does more good than harm in almost all cases.
Me too.
And the benefits definitely outweigh the drawbacks, but we should also be conscious of the drawbacks, just so we can maximize what's good about it and minimize some of the risks.
Yeah, exactly. Jeff, this has been awesome, and I know we've got to wrap this up, but let's do this again sometime in the future. It was great to hear your perspective.
Dude, Paul, I would love to do it again. I had a blast. Thank you so much for inviting me. I will look forward to the show, and I will go back and listen to the Richard Bressler show in your archive.
Dude, I'll send it to you. If there's is there anything you want to promote or talk about before we wrap this up?
Yeah, if people want to read the blog, it's at dirtywhitebelt.com/blog. All the podcasts are also archived there. If you want to check out the podcast, it's on iTunes, Stitcher, and SoundCloud. And we're really active on our Facebook page, which is Cageside Radio, facebook.com/Cageside Radio. And other than that, you should keep doing jiu-jitsu, keep spreading the love, and support your local jiu-jitsu artists.
Thanks, man. I really appreciate it. And thanks for coming on the show. This is great.
Anytime. I really had fun, man.
Let's do more of these.
All right, dude. Let's do it again.
Yep. Have a great time. Thanks again to Jeff for coming on the show, and thanks everyone for listening. If you haven't before, go check out our YouTube channel. We have regular content being posted up there, including narrated rules between me and Andreas, technique videos from competitions happening here in Europe, and lots of other stuff. Funny shit, technical shit, boring shit. We got it all. Just kidding. We don't have any boring shit. Make sure you go to YouTube, hit that subscribe button, and you'll be notified whenever we post a new video, which is pretty often. Thanks again to Yoga for BJJ for sponsoring this podcast. Go to yogaforbjj.net and sign up for their 2-week free trial. You'll be able to do 2 of their programs in that time. I guarantee you're going to feel better after you give them a try. As always, thanks to the music producers that make this podcast more enjoyable. Thanks to Vinny Russo for producing all of the beats that you hear during this podcast, and thanks to Waves Overhead for doing the theme song. You can find links to both of those artists on our website, Mat-Tricks.com. You heard a little bit of Waves Overhead at the beginning, and I'm going to play the rest of their song to make amends right now.